also got today with Frank Turner talking about England Keep My Bones. He was doing the 10th anniversary issue of it. And we spoke a little bit in that about how the manner and the way in which his Englishness manifests itself in his songwriting and where he sees his national identity in his music, which is interesting when I think about you, because I'd presumed you to be an American artist for the couple of years I've been listening to you. And it was only when doing the research for this that I discovered you were British. So I'm intrigued by where you kind of see your Britishness in your songwriting, if you see it in there at all.
I mean, definitely. Well, I guess it depends how far back you want to go, because, I mean, my first band that I had when I was 16, Cajun Dance Party, we were like really, really, really British. Like, I don't know if you come across us, but you have to be, I sound like such an old man now, but you have to be from a certain time. And yeah, that time was 2008. And
good year.
Was a good year. But yeah, like we were really English, obviously. Like, I mean, well, yeah, Daniel like sung in an English accent, and you know, our music was very inspired by like English influences. Not that I had any kind of creative role really at all in that band, other than bass player, but I was listening to a lot of English music myself. I was like really into Joy Division and New Order heavily at the time. And then, yeah, towards the end of Cajun Dance Party, that was like a kind of revelation. I had a revelation of new American bands that I discovered. And it was kind of almost by accident. But once I discovered, you know, well, the turning point was definitely Sonic Youth and Dinosaur Jr., but then that kind of led into bands like Pavement, Superchunk, Built to Spill, Grandaddy, and Wilco, and just more, Flaming Lips, like loads more. And once I kind of investigated that and fell into that, then I was like fully immersed in American indie music. And I was kind of, you know, I was really hungry for that. I felt like it was kind of like escapism. It all felt very romantic to me. So I only wanted to make music like that after I heard it. And I did also like English bands, but they were always English bands that kind of were inspired by American music. So, you know, English bands that fitted into that. So, you know, like Teenage Fan Club, obviously, My Bloody Valentine, etc. But yeah, like, I guess like later on, I guess like once I got kind of bored of listening to that type of music, then I started investigating English music more, I suppose. And so, yeah, I don't know, in terms of like where like my national identity kind of sits with my songwriting, I don't really feel like I think about things like in those terms. I kind of don't really listen to more one or the other. I listen to a lot of American music still, and yeah, and a lot of English music as well. But I, you know, in terms of like London or the UK being like a part of my creativity, I don't really think about it when I write songs.
Do you see it in the music you're listening to? Like when you're listening to an American band or an English band, are there certain things, can you hear their identity in their songwriting? Or again, is it not too present for you?
Yeah, it depends. It really depends. Yes, like undoubtedly for like, you know, I guess with a few bands that I've just mentioned, well, actually quite a lot of them, like, you know, Wilco, obviously mentioned Chicago in their songs, very proud of where they're from. Super Fair Animals, the same. Grandaddy, the same. Yeah, a lot of bands that I was listening to were very proud of where they were from and their identity. I think the reason why I stay away from that consciously or subconsciously is because I'm not really very proud of where I'm from. Like, I don't really think where I'm from is particularly cool. I'm from North London, a very suburban area, and it was really boring growing up where I grew up. And, you know, the closest kind of area of note was Camden. And I did used to go to Camden a lot, but music that is, you know, there have been artists from Camden who are really proud of being from Camden, and that's like the Libertines and Amy Winehouse. And I didn't really want to make music like that. That didn't really kind of connect with me. Although I do, you know, respect what they were doing. But yeah, I guess, you know, when I heard bands like sing about where they were from, whether that's like Wilco talking about Chicago or Super Animals talking about Wales. It always just felt so much more romantic. I didn't feel like connected to North London or London in general. And I think that's just because I have a kind of love-hate relationship with London.
It's interesting what you've kind of been saying much, and you don't see that side to your identity manifesting itself in your music. Was that part of your reasoning for beginning your podcast last year, where you kind of look at your Jewish identity through conversations with other people?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the podcast was it was like an educational experience for me. I was kind of trying to figure out a lot about myself, and the podcast, it started at a time when there was a big anti-Semitic incident, which was happened with Wiley, the rapper. Yeah, it just brought up a lot of stuff for me. I realized that like I have been playing down my Jewish identity, and I did grow up in a very Jewish environment, but I kind of, rejected it, and I was trying to discover why that was, and figure out why I kind of felt so averse to it and talking about it. And the more I thought about it, the more situations I started remembering, and the more things kind of came to light about anti-Semitic situations in the past. Basically, like nothing like too overt, like I was never beaten up or anything, but like it's just like subtle negative things that happen when you reveal your Jewishness. So like people, if you say like, oh yeah, I'm Jewish, and then someone will be like, so what do you think about Israel? And you don't want to talk about Israel, or it might have nothing to do with it, and everyone in the room might look at you and await your opinion or whatever. Or like the worst example was would be someone being like, oh, so you like jewelry or something, just like really ignorant.
Has that happened?
Yeah.
Something that obtuse, really?
Yeah,
wow.
I know, it's crazy. Like it doesn't happen often, but then again, like I wanted to make sure it didn't happen often by just not talking about it. So yeah, I didn't want to be different. I didn't want to kind of stick out, and like just situations like I had experienced just made me feel like I didn't want to talk about it anymore. So the podcast was more like an experiment for me, just being like, okay, I wonder what happens if I start being really upfront about my Jewish identity and just start talking about it, and talking about it with other people, and finding out about their Jewishness and their identity and how they connect to Judaism. So yeah, it was more of an experiment, just to see what would happen, and it was such a valuable learning experience for me. Yeah. And it was an intense time. I mean, that was such a lockdown project. Like I was doing so much during that time. I was doing the podcast one a week, like spent so long editing, and I was making this album, and I was making sourdough, I was making kombucha. I was just doing all of the stuff. But yeah, it was...
You were running?
Running, yeah, doing that as well. It was just like, I mean, my days were filled. I was making myself very busy.
Did it help with lockdown and that kind of environment that we've all found ourselves in?
It feels insensitive to kind of talk about the positive effects that lockdown has had for me, because if you're living with other people, if you have small kids, if you are living with someone not nice, then lockdown can be really unpleasant. Or if you're just like if you have trouble being or doing kind of creative hobbies or whatever, then yeah, lockdown will be really boring and at times really unpleasant. So yeah, it feels insensitive to talk about how much I enjoyed it, but I did really enjoy it. It was sort of, for me personally, it was like the perfect thing, the perfect environment for me to kind of explore loads of different things, loads of different projects. But obviously, like I say that and completely understand and sympathize with people that didn't have such a good situation. Like I have a second bedroom in my flat where I can record music. If I didn't have that, I would have found it significantly harder. But I do have that, and I feel really grateful that I have that. So yeah, it did help. It made lockdown a really, really prolific time. I wrote loads and loads of music, a lot of which will not see the light of day.
How come?
Well, I mean, that's a slight tangent, but at the beginning of lockdown, my publisher at Sub Pop Publishing said that they were getting their artists to write music that they could pitch to like TV shows, just to kind of see if they could get music supervisors to lend a kind of sympathetic edge to any of their roster who were, you know, potentially struggling without touring. So I started writing some music that was quite different, let's say, to what I would normally do. And then once I started, I was writing with my girlfriend, Anna, who I live with, and Anna's also a musician. Once we started, like, we literally couldn't stop. And we started writing so many fun songs, like, and it was so refreshing to kind of write in a style that was very different to what we would normally do. And yeah, and so then we had like, I think we wrote maybe between 30 and 50 songs that were all really, really good, but I don't know what we're going to do with them, but you know, they're on my hard drive.
She co-wrote a couple on the album too, right?
Yeah, and it was partially for that reason, because we had never like written together before. I find it quite difficult to like write with people. You know, even in my co-writing situations in the past, I would always write the music and someone else would write the lyrics or vocals. Both parts would be done separately. I've always found it quite difficult to write with someone. So this was my first experience of writing with anyone, and it happened to be with Anna. And it does help that we're together, but like it was a really good experience. It ended up being a really positive experience. And yeah, and so I think if I was struggling with a song on this record, it was always really helpful, like to just get Anna's perspective on it. And actually, I can hear her coming through the door now. But yeah, and All the Same, which was the song that was released today, not today when this goes out, but today, now. Yeah, Anna wrote the vocals with me, and this song actually started as a kind of pop song that we were potentially going to give to Sub Pop, and then I ended up liking it too much, so I just kept it for myself.
It's got that kind of churning guitar, doesn't it?
Yeah,
it kind of gives it that momentum. That, I guess you could imagine that, like what you were saying earlier about it being used for sync in that way, just because it has that kind of spark to it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really. It's very different to like anything else I've done previously, and that's kind of why I liked it. Yeah, I never thought I could do something like that, but then it was the act of writing something completely out of my comfort zone that allowed me to kind of go into those weird territories and yeah, kind of explore like weird instrumentation and stuff.
Was that the furthest out of your comfort zone you feel like you went on this record?
I was definitely less afraid than I ordinarily would be to go into certain musical areas. And I think that was just because I was like so insular and I was going through such an intense creative period that yeah, I felt like I could kind of push those boundaries and not be judged. Because I think I felt this a lot in the past, especially with Yuck. And it's the case that a lot of bands find themselves in that when they write an album in a certain style, or they write a first album in a certain style, or even a second, they have to carry on making music in that style. Otherwise, it would kind of alienate people. Or maybe even like, you know, it's just like a kind of a comfort zone. It's like, you know, that like this type of music creates, you know, a good response. And it's like, if I was to make a doom metal album now, then like there is a massive chance that, you know, it would get slated and no one would like it. And, you know, that's like, it basically, it like, it has the potential to make you a bit risk averse. And yeah, like I feel like that's only natural, but I think particularly when it came to like the third Yuck album, which I still do really like, I think I kind of got to a point where I was like, do I like the music that I'm making? I'm not sure. I needed a break just to kind of like figure out what it was exactly that, you know, that I wanted to do and, you know, why I was doing it.
How does your approach change? How does the feeling that the process gives you change after you figured that out?
I mean, I'm not sure how it changes, but like, I mean, when I'm writing, like, I've gotten to the stage where like, I don't write if I don't feel like it. So the most unpleasant thing in the world is writing music. Well, for me, is writing music when you don't feel like doing it. Some people feel like doing it all the time. I don't really think I'm one of those people. You know, I can like sit with a guitar and like, you know, sort of play around a bit. But if I don't feel like writing a song, I find it really difficult to bring myself to do it. And if I want to, but I can't, then it gets quite complicated. And that's where, you know, writer's block comes into it, you know, so-called writer's block, which I think is a myth, where you kind of get yourself worked up and go into a downward spiral. It's important for me to write only when I feel I really have something to say, or when I really want to, when I feel the drive to do it. And, you know, usually I know when I have that feeling because usually it's like I can't sleep because I have like an idea going around in my head. You know, I record like the whole day and forget to go to the toilet or something like that. If I'm kind of like doing it because it's like, oh, I should probably like think about what I'm going to do next or whatever, usually nothing good comes out of feeling like that. And I've had that feeling, you know, a few times in my career, and it's never resulted in anything that I feel like I can listen to today.
Is that when something like the podcast could help though? When you have that other creative outlet that you can turn to and work on a little bit if songwriting isn't quite coming to you at that time?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I think it's really important for any creative person, whether they're a musician or whatever, I think it's quite unnatural to work on one thing like forever without getting bored. If you can do that, great. But like, I really don't think that's something most people can do. I know like Gilbert O'Sullivan, who is an amazing songwriter. He has this kind of ethos, which is like turn up to work 9 to 5 at a desk writing songs. Like that is mad to me. Music is something that I do as like a kind of like release emotionally. Like if I did it every day for work, it wouldn't have any sort of emotional reward for me at all. But yeah, like I have a lot of other different things that I do, you know, that I have on the back burner in case I don't feel like doing music. One of the things which I've started doing recently is screen printing, but obviously that's a bit of an expensive hobby, but so is music as well. But but yeah, like music will always be like the number one, but I have a lot of other kind of different things that I get on with if music doesn't feel like something that I want to do.
Does that screen printing, does that tie into what you did for the record? Because you've done like illustrations for every song, right?
Yeah. And yes, actually, like I'm like a designer. I feel like such a dick saying that. I don't know why. It's just like one of those jobs that like I don't know, I just feel like a dick whenever I say that. But that is what I do. And yeah, I work at a music merchandise company. But yeah, like when I do design work for, it's called Terrible Merch. When I do design work for Terrible Merch, it's like a different kind of headspace to the kind of illustration or graphic design that I do just for myself. And so that's kind of why I wanted to start screen printing, because I wanted to have like projects, like I wanted to do a design and print it myself. The reason why I kind of got into graphic design in the first place was because it was after the third Yuck record. Well, I just broke up with my girlfriend, which was a long-term relationship. It was like 8 years. And, you know, the band had just completely like, it just broke me completely. Like I was completely, well, I was broke. I had no money. And I was living at my parents' house and I just broken up with my girlfriend. And it just kind of felt like everything in my life was just like, you know, had just crumbled down and I just needed to start again. So after kind of a few months of grieving, I was like, okay, I need to kind of literally start from scratch and like pretend I'm like in my early 20s or whatever and just like literally start again. So I learned graphic design and just started doing like internships in London. That was like a really positive change for me. And, you know, I think at that point in my life, like I just had enough of music. Like I couldn't do it anymore. It was too too like triggering. I know it's a really like annoying common term that people use at the moment, but like it's the only word. Like I was in like therapy at the time. Music was just really bad for me at the time. Like, you know, the amount of touring, the amount of like, you know, relationships that had gone bad just from music. I just felt like I needed a new direction in life. And then like, if I wanted to come back to music, then I felt like I'll do it when I'm comfortable, whether that's in, you know, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, whatever. And it turned out it was only a couple of years.
Did you expect it to be so quick?
I'm a very impatient person. Once I get an idea in my head, I kind of need to do it. I need to like complete it. It makes sense that it was so quick, but I was actively trying not to think about music after we finished touring for the third Yuck record. I was like, obviously like, you know, grieving the fact that I just got out of an 8-year relationship. It did just so happen that the only thing that really got me through that was making Perfume, which was the first solo album that I released. Again, it was just something that was unplanned. It was just like, I was just writing music like to have something to do. And then it just kind of turned into an album. But that was pretty much what happened with this album too, I suppose.
Well, it's interesting because I remember around the time of Perfume, you spoke about how To Be Alone, which is a breakup song, was very much the catalyst for that record. And this time around, you said that Palindromes was the catalyst, which is a song about getting together with someone. There's a weird kind of juxtaposition / parallel there.
Yes, To Be Alone is a very kind of dark song. It's like a lot of references would only really make sense to, in those songs would only fully make sense to the person that that song is about. And then it's the same with Palindromes too. There are a lot of hidden references in there that reference the specific evening that Anna and I got together. Those two songs like unintentionally symbolize dark and light. In Perfume, I was in a very dark place in my life. Like everything, you know, that I had and that I thought I knew was kind of uprooted. And with this album, it was like, you know, it symbolizes a very happy time, you know, getting together with someone who was my best friend. And yeah, and now we're together and it's a lot happier. And I think I'm in a much better place in my life significantly. And I think that's why I write albums usually. Like I write albums when there's kind of been a turning point in my life, like a chapter in a book. That sounds quite cheesy, but like when something has happened, when like enough like events in my life have kind of transpired that I feel like a kind of like a sponge full of water, for example. It's like then writing music is like wringing out the sponge. So right now I'm wrung out. And yeah, and another album will come when the sponge is full of water again. I feel like I'm taking the sponge metaphor very seriously.
To come back to Palindromes quickly, actually, did you find that quite an interesting concept to play with musically? This idea of something being reversed and being the same forwards as it is backwards?
One thing that would be really cool, which is not the case, is if the song was completely the same forwards as it is backwards, which is not the case. But
you'd have to reverse it halfway through. Halfway through, you'd still have to have that transition where everything goes backwards.
Yeah. Or another thing would be if like the riff, the guitar riff was like the same forwards as it is backwards, but I'm not clever enough to do that. And I don't have enough patience. But Palindromes was not something that I was like, the concept of a palindrome was definitely not something that I was playing with musically. More like, I guess as a lyrical concept, I just found it quite fun and quite kind of metaphorical. And I think I came up with it when I was driving. Yeah, I don't know. I liked the word. I think a word has to be good to sing as well. It just meant something to me. It was nice. Like it was, I liked it because it was a way of writing a song about someone called Anna that, you know, doesn't mention her name. But it is obviously about her. Like anyone who hears the song who knows us both immediately says like, oh, that's so cute. It's about Anna. That's what I kind of liked about it. Cause I don't think I would ever write. I mean, it's difficult to think of. I think it's the first time I've ever written like a quote unquote love song. So I didn't want it to be like a name. So this was, I guess it was a kind of way to make it about someone, but not at the same time.
It comes back to that idea of it being what you were saying earlier on about the hidden references.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, there's a few hidden references in that song. I mean, there's a mention of wine, because we were like, I don't know, we were very drunk when we got together. I mean, it's a long story, and I feel bad getting into it now because it concerns other people, but it was a very kind of, it wasn't an easy situation. It was very messy because like she had just gotten out of a long-term relationship herself, and I was really good friends with her ex-boyfriend as well. So it was quite messy, and it didn't end up being messy. Like, we're all still really good friends today, and you know, both of them play in my live band, so we're all, you know, on really good terms. But yeah, there's it was such an intense situation. It was such an intense time, and I felt like I needed to write a song about it to commemorate it. And Anna did the same thing, actually. Well, she wrote like nearly a whole album about it, and then I produced that too. So maybe, yeah, hopefully that will come out later this year, and maybe that song will make even more sense hearing another perspective.
It was interesting what you were saying as well about palindromes and how you found that such a ripe kind of word to explore lyrically, and there was so many connotations from it that it was very inspiring. Was that a similar thing for you with Pedestrian? Did that word kind of take on a similar role?
Yeah, it did. Sometimes it's really good having a writer's prompt, like a word. So some people, you know, use a title as a kind of jumping off point. And I do like doing that. I did write the music for Pedestrian before I had the title. Like usually when I write songs, I'll record it on my phone and just mumble like complete nonsense, like kind of, you know, like kind of strands of lyrical phrases. Sometimes that's a good way of writing lyrics. Like sometimes you'll just come out with something and be like, oh, that sounds good, and then use that as a jumping off point. I think in this instance, Pedestrian came about because I was running and I saw a sign that said pedestrians don't walk here or whatever, something referencing pedestrians. I can't remember what it was exactly. And yeah, I just thought that was a cool word. And I was thinking like, you know, what exactly are pedestrians, and what does that word mean? Are you a pedestrian when you just go outside, or are you always a pedestrian? Is pedestrian just another word for human? And you know, what are the implications of that? And then I started thinking about how as humans we're kind of, especially in London, we're kind of all very much living our separate lives, and then something happens that brings us all together. Yeah, we're all kind of walking alone in our lives. And I found that very interesting as a kind of prompt. None of the songs on the album are particularly about lockdown or coronavirus, but that being said, I don't think this album would have happened without it. So like, it's important to recognize that. Like, this song is not about coronavirus, but it is about something cataclysmic that could happen to the human race and how that would affect like humanity and, you know, mortality. So yeah, like, and I was kind of thinking more of like an alien invasion or like a comet or something. So like, for example, like, you know, the lyric, like something in the sky, like you see something in the sky and it just kind of takes you out of yourself. But that being said, like, you know, I came up with this idea probably in the context of the fact that something unprecedented was happening to the human race at this time.
Is that scenario you kind of described there too, where you walk past that sign, you see the word pedestrian, and suddenly your mind spirals and you're off? Is that a reflection of how your mind works on a daily basis too? Because most people would just walk past that sign, not bat an eyelid, but it's such a tiny detail, but it suddenly becomes this massive thing that you can explore creatively and look at in the broader context of things. Yeah,
I think so. I think this is also like what I do as like a designer. Like when I'm out in the world, like I've trained myself to always look at things from an analytical perspective, like, because most things are like designed by a human, most things we see every day. So I think the way you get better as a designer is by like looking at everything and thinking about how it was made and the creative process behind it. I've gotten used to looking at things like from an observational viewpoint and kind of taking them in. And so that's probably why I was paying attention to something as inane as a road sign. But yeah, like I think in terms of like using that as like a writer's prompt and like a jumping off point, I'm always looking out for something that could be inspirational from a musical perspective. I always want something to write about. I always want some creative project to be getting on with. And so like any inspiration I can get like from the outside world, anything that kind of like feels like, oh, that could be good or whatever, like I'll write it down or record it or whatever. So I'm always like on the lookout for something. And yeah, Pedestrian was what kind of came into view like at that time. But yeah, like I mean it's something that I'm always thinking about, just because like I'm kind of used to always thinking about where I can get like my next kind of subject or like creative subject. Yeah.
With what you were saying about the way that you look at everything in design terms too, and you're constantly thinking about how was this made in the creative process behind it, would you ever look to natural things for inspiration in that context too? Like a tree or something? Because I was out the other day actually, and I was walking in the woods, and there were these great big oak trees that must have been there for a couple hundred years, and the pattern on the bark of them was so perfect, and the way it was like diagonal, it almost looked like it was a piece of interior design or something.
Yeah, I mean, yes, definitely. No, it's important to look at everything, not just man-made things. Unfortunately, like in where I live, I mean, there are some really nice green spaces around where I live. I live really near the Lee River in East London, which is really, really good. It's really good for running, but just living near water, having access to like a river, I don't know, I just really like it. I like being near water.
Centering.
Yeah, exactly. Sounds really pretentious, but like going to the river. It's
true though.
It's totally true. Going to the river, you know, on like a weekly basis or whatever, or daily, it's just so nice having access to that. I really, really like it. But yeah, like I think there is a song on the record which is called The Weatherman, and that was inspired by a bottle of wine that I saw of the same name. But then that was kind of like a jumping off point for, I guess, how emotionally connected I feel to like the changing of seasons, which this year has been really rapid. You know, English people have a fascination with weather. We like can't stop talking about it. We're like fetishized by it.
It's like roads.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. But I think English people are obsessed with weather because we have very clear, defined seasons, and each one has its really unique character. And it's not like that everywhere else. Like, I mean, well, in like
LA.
Exactly. Yeah. LA, obviously, it's like pretty much the same all year round. But then like in New York as well, like the seasons are so extreme, and sometimes the summer will be so unpleasant that you can't enjoy it. Same with winter. Like I've been in New York when like there's been like, you know, so much snow that it like covers like cars on the side of the road and stuff. But I mean, I feel like in this country, it's like it's very temperate, and like I feel like it's not extreme, and it's, you know, the weather is in small enough doses that you can actually acknowledge it and enjoy it. And I feel like the changing of seasons in this country is really, it's a really magical time. Yeah. So that's kind of what that song is about. But it's like it's similar as well to Japan, because in Japan, I think there's a lot of similarities between Japan and the UK in that they're both island nations. We both have a ridiculous obsession with formality and manners sometimes. And we kind of have, you know, crazy nonsensical phrases that we say that mean nothing, but we just say them because it's like social convention, like saying bless you after you sneeze, or, you know, stuff that's like rooted in like very, very old English history. And the Japanese have the same thing. But in Japan, they also have like a really big appreciation for the changing of seasons. Like when Blossom starts coming out, it's like a huge national festival. And I love that. And I feel like, you know, we probably couldn't get into that here. There is potential. We have the same fascination with weather. There's potential for a national festival surrounding something as simple as blossoms coming out if that happened in this country.
I feel like we would do it and then it would rain. That would be classic British. We would plan it for like the first day of spring when everything's supposed to be beautiful, and it would just be pouring the whole day.
Yeah, totally.
That's interesting though. Could we see that, to kind of come back to how we started this conversation, could we see that as an example of your Britishness manifesting itself in your songwriting?
You know what? I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, although it's very subtle, but yeah, I mean, you know, people talk about SAD, seasonary affective disorder. I think, you know, people get depressed in the winter and feel elated in spring. Spring is a really important time because like it's like rebirth. It's a kind of a almost holy time in Japan because it symbolizes rebirth. You know, and I'm born in May as well, and you know, I don't know. I just, spring for me is such a special time, and then autumn's really special too because it's, you know, I guess it makes you think or consider your own mortality. So it's special for a different reason, but maybe slightly more melancholy. But yeah, it's all about the transitional seasons for me. So yeah, and I think these seasons, you know, they're quite unique to the UK. So yeah, I think maybe that is a small, very small expression of my national pride.
When you say autumn makes you think about your mortality, is that a time of year when you particularly seem to notice the time passing and you kind of see the leaves decaying and stuff, or what is it that's prompting that for you?
Well, it is, yeah, it's traditionally a time of change and things decaying in the natural world. But yeah, that's what autumn symbolizes. It's difficult not to think about that. But autumn's still a really special time, but it's kind of very contemplative. The smells in autumn, I don't know, there's like, you can feel like the chill in the air, like just when winter is kind of around the corner. And I feel like that's a really special time. I've always really liked autumn and winter for that reason, just because you can kind of go into yourself. You know, you don't have to go out. You can kind of just analyze yourself and just, you know, hibernate a little bit. And, you know, like in kind of Scandinavian countries, where it never gets light in winter seasons, it really is a proper chance to hibernate. And yeah, it's kind of a lot of kind of sad things have happened to me during winter, you know, like notably like breaking up with my ex-girlfriend. So it's kind of, it represents quite a negative time, but also like now it's become quite positive because it's made me realize how far I've come in my life as well.
I wanted to ask as well why you put the Weatherman at track 5, because I have an understanding that you've quite a fascination with track 5 and this idea that it has the potential to be the best track and the best song on the record. Why was it that cemented itself in that position on the album for you?
Yeah, interesting. Yes, you're right. I do have an obsession with track 5. I think a lot of musicians like who are really like in love with the album as a format will notice how an album travels from start to finish. So like opening song is so important. I feel like my favorite song by most bands is the opening song to my favorite album, probably just because it reminds me of the excitement that I feel, you know, getting ready to kind of start the journey for the first or 100th time. But yeah, like track 5 is really good because it's like often like dead center in the middle of the album. And it's like, you know, often like the album has reached its climax at that point. Usually after that point, it goes down a little bit. And then last track is like, you know, often a chance to have something amazing as the closer. Not sure if I did that this time. But yeah, in terms of like the Weatherman being track 5, I think that it wasn't really planned like that. So I have written albums in the past where like it started with a song, like a jumping off point. And then I've been like, okay, that would make a good opener. Now I'm going to write a track 5. Now I'm going to write, you know, a closing track or whatever. Or like going back through my hard drive and being like, that song I wrote 2 years ago would make an amazing track 3, you know, something like that. Thinking about things in those terms of like, you know, an album from start to finish. I know like Glow and Behold, the second Yuck record was written very much like that, because I kind of built up this like fantasy of what an album was in my head, like a very, very mythical thing. I had several albums that I was listening to on rotation. One was Yankee Hotel Foxtrot by Wilco, and then The Soft Bulletin by Flaming Lips, Rings Around the World by Superfly Animals, and a few more. Keep It Like a Secret by Built to Spill. Yeah, I wanted to write an album like that. I wanted to write an album that, you know, made me feel the emotions that I felt when I listened to those records. But I think that process kind of grew quite old to me, and I still really love albums as a format, but it really depends. Like, it depends on the whole process. And sometimes, like, I think particularly for this album, like I just wanted to enjoy the process of writing rather than kind of thinking about things in such a not contrived, but, you know, kind of, I don't know, convoluted sort of way. Yeah, instead of kind of thinking about things in terms of like their positions on the album, I just wanted to kind of like let the album take its natural course. So it just so happened that The Weatherman needed to be track 5 because it made sense in that position. Whether it is a track 5 song or not is not up to me to decide. I feel like, yeah.
I was going to say, I think it is in terms of what it's trying to do thematically. Like, because it's looking at this idea, I know you were talking about the seasons earlier on, but it's also looking at the fact that we never really know what's around the corner, and there's no way to predict what's coming, just like the weather. You can have a vague idea, but it's never quite going to plan out exactly how you anticipate. That's such a strong concept that it feels like it works well in that position on the record.
Yeah, I think so. It does feel quite central to the whole vibe of the record, because like, I mean, one thing about this album is that like, I felt like I was able to look outside of myself for the first time, like ever in my writing. Perfume was a really insular album. I was singing about myself and only about myself, and everything was just in reference to myself and like, you know, what I was going through at the time. But with this album, I was like, okay, like, I mean, The Weatherman is still about myself, but it's written like from the perspective of someone else. So I was kind of trying different things, but like, overall, I think this album is a lot more of a kind of inside looking out album rather than, you know, the kind of insular nature of what Perfume was, I suppose.
I read a quote from you in an interview previously as well, where you said that you try not to think too much about the future because plans always change and you never end up getting what you want. Have the last few years made you believe in that more or less, that idea?
Oh, it's a good question. Well, I think the last year and a bit has shown everyone that they can't make plans because stuff like this happens and throws everything up in the air. When I was really young, I saw a Sonic Youth interview with Thurston Moore, and he said that he never thinks about the future. So because I was so young and impressionable, I was like, I'm never going to think about the future now. And that did work for a while, but...
He's also lying.
He was probably trying to be really cool. And you know what? I was so sucked into all that. I completely believed him. I think it's important to think about the future a little bit and to try and make plans. But then again, also like, particularly like when I was writing Perfume, I got really into Stoicism as a philosophy. I can't remember much about it now, but it became like almost like a cult for me, like is the only way to describe it. Like I read all these books and like got really, really into this author called Ryan Holiday, who's like...
I know that name.
Yeah, he is kind of like... Oh, this is going to sound fucking ridiculous, but he's kind of like almost like a business guru / like stoic philosopher. He used to be like very high up at American Apparel and then quit and then like basically like became the stoic leader. My colleague at Terrible Merch actually turned me on to his books, and they, you know, I found Stoicism when I really, really needed it, because I was like obviously just going through my breakup and stuff. And so like, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And it was all about constantly kind of thinking about death, but not in like a negative way, but in a positive way. So, you know, and always letting things take their natural course and knowing that, you know, not worrying about things that don't, that you can't control, if there's like an obstacle in your life, then kind of using it to your advantage. It was all like stuff that I really needed to hear. You know, I think a bit of Stoicism is really good, and it's all like really interesting stuff. But yeah, I think I took it a bit too. I kind of got sucked into it a little bit too much. But yeah, like I think generally speaking, like there are some things that I maintain, and I think the way you think about the future is a good one, just in the sense that like, not like in a negative sense, like our plans never work out, so like you never make, so like why bother making them? But like more like, you know, whatever happens for a, you know, not when I say a reason, not like some kind of like divine energy, but it just happens and you can't control it. So like, just kind of let things take their course and make plans. Yeah, definitely make plans, but also like, don't be afraid to change those plans if things, you know, don't go the way you want them to go. So I think that's kind of the best. That's what's been working for me recently. I don't plan. I have kind of like loose plans. I definitely didn't plan to make this album, but it just happened. I don't have plans for another album, but I know it will happen soon in the future. I'm not really sure when, or it might not. Either way is fine.